here with Priceless Realty in Cape Coral. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I thought I would talk about what is the more common contract that you as a buyer will see, and also as a seller as well. And sometimes this contract can throw people off when they see the term as is, and I'll explain the reason why that in a minute. I'm not going to go over the whole contract because there's a lot of information on here, but I'll go over just some highlights on it, just some things you need to be aware of when you go through the contract. So when we see the term as is, people generally think that we're buying a property as is, and technically you are, but they generally think, well, I can't go and request a seller for repairs if I come across something in the inspection report that needs to be addressed. That's not true at all. You can do that. The seller needs to understand as well that an as is contract doesn't necessarily mean that they're just selling the home as is, because I do get sellers sometimes, they'll say I'm selling it as is. I say I understand that. Let me just highlight some things to you in that regard first so you understand what this contract is talking about. Right, so this is the contract right here. As I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot ask for any repairs on a property, and it doesn't mean a seller is going to sell a property not expecting any repairs to be requested or made. So obviously the first part, we've got the seller name, the buyer, as you'd expect. Then the other thing about this contract is that it has sections like section 1, 2, and so on. Every line is numbered as well, so you can make reference to specific line numbers in the contract. You put the details of the property in here, as you would see in the first part. In this section 21, or part D, outlines typically what comes with the property. So normally will be the stove, refrigerator, that sort of thing, ceiling fans, light fixtures. So things that are physically attached to the home generally would stay, unless you put on addendum that the seller excluding certain items, which can be in this contract. This is where the personal property one, sometimes it can be a bit confusing. If it's a cash buy, it doesn't really matter, because some people will sell property down here turnkey or furnished. If that's the case, you're on a cash property, you could put that in here. But most of the time people use it for washer and dryer, because washer and dryers aren't generally considered as a standard thing that goes with the property, and not every seller will include it anyway. So you put washer and dryer in here. Sometimes I put in a pool heater, but I've run situations where a bank doesn't even want the pool heater on there, they want to offer there. But you need to be careful if you're doing a finance offer, and if the property comes turnkey furnished, that you don't put all that information in there, because it can throw a bank off and they can ask for it to be removed. Now if you were doing a cash transaction, you could put whatever you want in here, and then on the items excluded could be personal items like clothing, computers, could be things on the wall, photographs, things you generally wouldn't want anyway. Then I also put a purchase price in here. We put the deposit on. Typically when I write an offer and I send it to the selling agent, I won't include the deposit. I generally won't include that or have it go until we've got an agreed to contract, because once it's all ratified and signed, then we can do that within 3 days here. Because if you give me a check, I have to put it in the title company. If the deal doesn't come together, you have to wait for that check to clear before you can get the money back. So it makes most sense really to not offer the deposit until this is ratified and rounded. The seller down here in this area that we're in right now picks the title company. There are some benefits to that to you as a buyer. In other parts of our area, for example in Naples, the opposite happens, and there is a benefit to the seller, and outline what some of those are right there. Additional deposit could be requested, maybe after the inspection period has passed and you as a buyer are fine with that, with whatever's been determined on the inspection side, and then the seller may request, or you could even put in here additional deposit as well. Financing, this is where the finance amount will go, and then the balance would be what's due at closing. So that would be less what deposit you would make. So if the balance was $50,000, you made a $5,000 deposit, then your obviously balance would be $45,000. We put a time for the seller to accept the property. Normally I try and give them 48 hours. 24 hours sometimes can be a little bit quick. Particularly if we're falling into a weekend, then want longer than that. Sometimes I will do 24 hours. If I'm making an offer first thing in the morning, I'll give them until the next day to respond, particularly if it looks like it's a really good buy for the money and so we want to move on relatively quickly, we can do that. This was like years ago, when the market was going crazy, you generally want an answer pretty much right away, because the longer it went, the more opportunities for multiple offers. But we are not, as of 2024, April, in that market. We swing over to a buyer's market, so you as a buyer have more control right now. The contract closing date will be one that agreed to by all parties. Sometimes we'll put on or before that date, so it's a possibility if we want to close it early, we can do that. And we don't need to do another addendum changing that. So always put on or before on it. Now this one here, extension of closing date, there are a couple of things that can affect that, particularly if we're doing financing and maybe the lender doesn't have everything ready to go and we need to extend out the closing date and do that. Or as it mentions in here, what a lender has to do has to give you the full closing disclosure on the property, and you have 3 days in which to go over that and review that. So if we're due, say, to close on a Friday, let's say this week, and you don't get disclosure till today, Thursday as it happens to be, we're not going to be able to close on time. That rarely happens. That would be a mistake of the finance company. And obviously I can throw timelines off. If you are looking to move into a property as a buyer and you've got all your moving stuff ready to go, the seller's looking to move out that day. So we typically don't have that happen very often, but occasionally we get it where a mortgage company needs an extension to get it closed. So we try and make sure we're very much aware, myself, if I represent you as a buyer, where we are on that timeline. The force majeure one could relate to a hurricane. I've had that happen where like Hurricane Ian came in, delayed a closing, and that can happen. There are other sections that deal with that. Some of these deal with occupancy and possession, assignability. You can assign a contract if you want. Some people do that if maybe they realize they're going to put in a trust, or maybe put in an LLC. So that's when you would do that. Section 8 is probably the most important one, or one of the most important ones on this contract. This outlines this if it's a financing one or if it's cash, so you mark it as such. If this is a finance offer, generally you have 30 days and to get a full loan approval on that. If you've got a closing that's due to close in 30 days, I would probably put 25 days on this, because we need to make sure this is going to close on time, because the seller's looking to move out, you want to move in. But some agents will put 30 days on each, because if you don't get loan approval within 30 days, you can back out of the contract and you get your deposit back. But you have to stay within the timeline. If you go outside of the timeline, let's say I put 25 days and you don't get loan approval, but you still think I'm not going to have any issues getting it, basically it's assumed you have what you need. And if you fail to close on that particular property on that contract date, then the seller basically can keep your deposit. So as an agent represent you on the buying side, it's important for me to keep an eye on what's going on with that, in contact with your mortgage company, so if there's any issues, because I don't want you to lose a deposit if it turns out you cannot get this finance. But I generally tell you, on the offers that I write with a buyer, that rarely ever happens. That would really be unusual unless something got missed or it's come up last minute that changes that. But I make sure we stay in those timelines right here. And this is explained more in that section right here about loan approvals, defaulting, and we can go over that in more detail if you have questions on that. 9 outlines what's the cost associated with a seller and with a buyer. On the buyer, obviously, if you're doing a mortgage, the mortgage company is going to have some closing costs associated with that. They will outline what those are, but typically both on a cash and also on a finance side, I recommend that you get a survey done. On a mortgage company, it's going to be required anyway. On a cash side, there is not a whole lot of expenses relating to a purchase of a property. Generally, it's just what the closing company may charge, which isn't a whole lot on that anyway. But there are some other things that I mentioned here. We can go over to talk about that a little bit later on. But if you're buying a condo, there could be HOA fees, other assessments associated with that. Also, to the title company will provide a title insurance policy. You generally get this instead like up to 15 days before. It can be as short as 5 days, but you have a right to, on order, to look over that and see if there's any title issues. Generally, the title company will highlight if there are issues anyway that a seller needs to address, and we'll reach out to the seller and get those worked out. And there are extensions that can extend out a contract. There's another reason why too a contract can be extended out if there is a title issue as well, and there are provisions in the contract to do that too. On line 168 here, and this is pretty common down here, that a seller will tip the closing agent and they will pay for the owner's title policy. So they'll give you a title policy, they'll pay for that. That is different from the mortgage lender's policy that you as a buyer, if you are getting a mortgage, are required to pay. That's not seller related, that's completely different. This just relates to making sure you have a good equitable title to the property. So in the Cape Coral Fort Myers area, the seller will pay for that, and that benefits you, in which you as a buyer, they are providing a title policy, and that can be a couple $1,000s. Now if I'm in Naples, it's the opposite. In Naples, you as a buyer can pick the title, well, the company normally would do that, but you also would pay the owner's policy as well. Again, all this is negotiable. You can request that the selling agent pay that, because I can mark all that stuff on this contract. So any of that sort of thing isn't necessarily written in stone. It is somewhat negotiable. Surveys, as I said, I would recommend get one of those. You can ask for a warranty. Now, special assessments, this can also relate to a condo. Sometimes there will be a special assessment that's associated with the repairs on the building, particularly after Hurricane Ian, and that might continue on. You can ask a seller to pay that off, or you can assume it, that sort of thing as well. And there will be a separate addendum on the condo association rider that will outline all that stuff out. Now, within Cape Coral, if you're buying a single family residence though, we do have assessments. They come in for city, water and sewer. In certain sections of the area, particularly like in the southeast section, all those assessments were paid off some years ago. Some parts of the southwest will be paid off, some will not. There may be an assessment balance that runs a couple $1,000s, and you can ask a seller to pay that off. In some cases, it will ask you to assume it. It's billed as part of your taxes. It's paid over a 20-year period. So if it's been over there for like 10-15 years, that balance will have dropped down. However, there are areas in Cape Coral, particularly in the northwest and in the southeast section, not northeast section of Cape Coral, that are in the process of getting assessments. Some are getting them right now, some will get them in the future. Some areas won't get them until 2040. So we're looking at the northwest Cape Coral, need to understand an area is it on well and septic. If it is, when the assessment's coming in, because there are areas due to get that in 2025, another one's due to start in 2027. I as your agent know that, I can point that out and give you a general idea what costs are associated with that, so you're aware of it. The other thing you have to consider too is if you're in a flood zone, flood insurance is something else you need to consider, particularly if you're getting a mortgage on that. And there are things talk about radon, gas, permit disclosure, mold. So all those things you can have checked out if you feel it's necessary to do that. You're entirely entitled to do that. Flood zone, again, we need an elevation certificate to confirm what the flood insurance will be. If a home is built in the 70s and the 80s, it probably, a flood certificate's not going to make any difference anyway, because it's not really much of an elevation. So those will tend to be already fixed. But if we have a feeling that maybe it sits higher than what we'll ordinarily come across, then it would be a good idea to go ahead and get one. FEMA have recently changed some things in that regard. It's called FEMA 2.0. It changed about 2 years ago now, that we're finding areas that were not in flood zones now are. You could have an area in Cape Coral where one side of the street is in a flood zone, others are not. You can even have property, like I can have my next door neighbor might now be considered in a flood zone, I'm not, and the house next door to me is not, and one behind is. It's just gotten kind of weird. So those are things we need to check out and be aware of, because it's kind of throwing everybody off. So what areas you think were not in flood zones are now in flood zones. So that's something to be aware of here as well. Homeowners associations, always need to be aware of those. We don't have a lot of those in Cape Coral. Pretty much Cape Coral doesn't have any of that unless it's gated. Then you run into those, and some are relatively low HOA fees on those. A condo one is different. Condo association generally has to maintain the outside of the building. They'll have money for reserves, and there's some changes coming to 2025 with that. This one here, section I, FIRPTA, is something to be aware of, because you as a buyer have to make sure that this is paid to the US government. This is where we have, for example, we got a seller's Canadian. So when the Canadian seller goes to sell a property, the US government wants to make sure they get their taxes. So you as a buyer have to make sure that gets paid to the US government, and it's FIRPTA, which is Foreign Investment Real Property Tax Act. So we'll always make sure that's paid on the title side. It'll be on the title. I'll make sure a seller is, if it's international, generally the selling agent will be aware of that anyway, but it is covered in this contract. There can be a separate addendum that involves with that. The one thing that if you are buying a single family residence, and I think it's $300,000, either 3 or 350, that we can double check on. And if they are a foreign seller, then you don't have to collect that money. And you have to sign an affidavit saying that you're buying it as a main residence. However, if it goes over a certain value, it could be, I think it's 15% right now. But again, those are just things you're aware of. Seller's disclosure not required in the state of Florida, though on the sellers that I have, I'm getting them. If they're a seller that's never lived in the property, you might just put on it they never lived in it. But a seller is supposed to disclose known defects on a property. This is probably one of the more important sections here, is section 12, this inspection period. You have up to 15 days in which to get an inspection done. Most of the time I'll do that within 10 days because most sellers typically won't go out 15 days, though you can always give it a try. What this is saying right here, that you are going to have this property inspected. If there is, and you're going to pay for those inspections as well. If for any reason when you inspect a property you feel it's not suitable, you can back out and get your deposit back, and that can be for anything. This doesn't specifically say it must be related to one thing. So if there's a light bulb out, if you don't like a color, a carpet, maybe a window, or the backyard, whatever, after you're going to put in a contract, maybe you're not feeling this isn't quite where I want to be, you can back out within that time period. Now, if we do an inspection on the property and there are things that reveal, for example, we have an air conditioning issue, if I have a plumbing issue, if I have a roof issue, we can go to the seller and ask them to take care of that. Because sometimes with those issues, you can't get insurance unless those are resolved. The house I'm in right now, I bought this a year ago. It was an older home. It was on an as-is contract. We did inspections. It turned out we have polybutylene plumbing in this property. I cannot get insurance unless that is replaced. I asked the seller to do that. That is a $12,000 repair, and the seller, an elderly gentleman, took care of that. Now, I wasn't taking advantage of him, but I cannot get insurance on this property unless that is handled. And he understood that if I back out, he's got the same problem anyway, so he took care of that. So we'll generally go over an inspection and see what we've got. Now, if we've got cosmetic stuff, if we've got maybe a screen that's damaged, just cracks on tile, stuff like that. If it's cosmetic, I generally won't go after that. My main things are electrical, plumbing, roofing, air conditioning, those sort of things that can generally add up and can be an issue, because you don't want to move in a home that's got a 20-year-old air conditioner, it's not working. I had another one where we did that on a condo. AC wasn't working, 20 years old, the seller put a new air conditioner in there. So, because we realized again, if we walked away from it, it's going to have to do it anyway. So this just gives you outright here on that one. Walkthroughs, obviously we do walkthrough the day before or day of closing and make sure we don't have any issues. If there are some permitting issues that come up, we can ask a seller to address those. There are timelines for that. Escrow agent will typically be the title company on that. They talk about some liability issues, what happens if a buyer defaults, if a seller defaults. Obviously you want to look at the title, any easement, restrictions, limitations. We briefly talked about title examination, survey. This is another important part right here, is time of essence. Sometimes I find agents get confused about this, particularly if we do an inspection. Like for example, right now, if I put an offer on a property and I say that we want an answer within 3 days, if we want an answer on the contract and falls on the weekend, that counts as 3 days. So from the time we make an offer, that basically is talked about calendar days. However, let me read you what it says here. If the real property, wrong section, let me get it right here. So calendar days based on where the property is located shall be used computing time periods. So that simply relates to when an offer is made. Other than time for acceptance, what we're talking about, an effective date as set forth in paragraph 3, any time periods provided for or dates specified in this contract, whether pre-printed, handwritten, typewritten, or inserted herein. So let's say an inspection. So I want to do a 10-day inspection period, but my 10-day happens to fall on a Saturday or Sunday, or national legal public holiday, or any day on which a national legal public holiday is observed because it fell on a Saturday or Sunday, shall extend to the next calendar day, which is not a Sunday. So basically, if a 10-day inspection fell, let's say expired on the Saturday, we actually have till the Monday to basically reach out and have that taken care of. But I'm typically not going to leave the very last day on an inspection trying to get things sorted out. We wouldn't want to do that. But we could have a financing contingency where it happens to fall on a holiday, say on the Monday, then it would extend to the Tuesday. So for certain things, again, escrow deposit, if I do that on a Thursday, let's say, would do within 3 calendar days. So I go Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it will fall on the Monday, is what that will do. Some agents do generally get confused about that, but it does specify in the contract what and is not covered. Force majeure, again, this can relate to a issue, particularly here it can be hurricane related, or it could be, it says pandemic, government cut down. I ran into a situation where we were due to close on a property, had the seller on right before Hurricane Ian was due to hit our area. All the title companies closed down. We left, obviously it wasn't going to close. When we came back, unfortunately this property did have damage, and we had to renegotiate the contract to cover that, and the seller would get less money than they had intended. The seller wasn't very happy about it, but we're not going to stick around for a storm to close on the property. We need to get out of here because you don't know what these storms are going to do. But however, if it's something that sometimes we'll have a hurricane come through the area and we get nothing, there's absolutely nothing, it didn't go to our area, it went somewhere else, then we basically have 7 days to get a contract, get it closed. But it says here it can go 30 days beyond that if we have some other issues. We have no electricity for a week, 2 weeks, whatever, which can happen on that. So this, a lot of other things, just talks about prorations and credits, closing documents, where you close at, and we can go over that. 1031 tax exchange is another one that can happen, particularly if you've got a buyer that has an investment property. That buyer has a certain timeline in order to identify a like type property from one they just sold or are selling. And this doesn't cost the seller anything, it just helps the buyer is what it does. So 1031 can be another addendum that we see right here as well. And there can be riders, addendas, FERTA we just talked about earlier, how that goes right there. And then this can be your addenda section. So if we have a homeowners association, we'd have that ticked. If we have a condo rider, we do that. If we have FHA, VA financing, which is another different form of financing, we tick that addendum. Short sale, I'm not seen in a while. Homeowners, you can pretty much have an addendum about anything. You can click other and put something else in here as well. This is where you can put additional terms. So if you want to include the monkey, you could do that, or the golden elephant that sits on the driveway, you can put that all in here. This is going to be, like for example, if we're doing an FHA financing, we get a lot of FH buyers. They have a typical 3.5% they could put down. They don't have closing costs. We will see that where will our seller contribute towards closing costs. There is a change coming in July of 2024 in regards to this recent lawsuit, in which you may find some sellers are now requiring the buyer to pay the buyer's agent the fee for helping them buy a property. So but you can, as a buyer, still request that a seller pay that, and that's where this will go. And you put, I as a buyer request that the seller pays such and such compensation to my buyer's agent at closing for execution of this contract. And again, that can be somewhat negotiable. The way I'm seeing it right now, particularly in our area, I'm seeing most sellers are still paying a commission to the listing side and to the buyer side. Wherever commission is agreed to, they'll pay to the broker. The broker is then going to pay the buying side as well. On the selling side, if I've got a seller, I'm going to recommend they do that too. That you're going to pay a set commission, and it's going to be this dollar amount or this percentage amount, and that's going to be split two sides, between the buying side and the selling side. Because if you don't do that as a seller, you're probably going to reduce that pool of buyers from like this to practically nothing. So if you want to sell your property, particularly in the market right now, you need to make it available to as many people as possible. And then you'd obviously sign the contract. So I spent about some 26 minutes going over that. There are other parts of this contract if you want to go over. If you want to have an attorney look at it, you're entitled to do that. If you have any questions on it, let me know. But this is pretty much the common contract that we use. There is another one that gives specific percentages on repair amounts that can be set, a limit on dollar amounts. I'm not a big fan of that contract, because if somebody puts in like caps a repair amount $1,000 and turns out the property needs a new air conditioner and it's an $8,000 air conditioner, we've only agreed to $1,000. Whereas as a contract gives them the ability to go after and say, hey, this need, in order to move forwards, we need to have this addressed and taken care of and fixed. So I've probably done hundreds and hundreds of these. So as you can tell, I'm fairly familiar with the contract. It does get updated from time to time. We'll probably see another update coming in the next couple months of what's going on with this lawsuit and stuff like that. But this is where it stands right now. And there are other addendums. As I said, the FHA, there's the VA. I think it also mentioned on here, which I didn't talk about or quickly, is lead-based paint. A home built before 1978, a lead-based paint addendum is required. Most sellers don't know if a home has any lead-based paint in it because it's been painted so many times anyway, but it is required on properties built before 1978, so we'll execute that as well. So again, I'm all familiar with that too. If you have any questions about real estate or would like to see a video on a specific subject, let me know. But continue to look at my channel, and I'll continue to post things about our area that I think will help you both on the buy and the selling side, and things that I see coming up. So hopefully enjoyed this video and found it helpful.